The maps.
We are recording.
We are recording. Hi, Kimberly Kaye, otherwise known as Edward Simon, in his house. I am so honored that you're willing to sit here with me today to talk about the kind of intersection between trauma and chronic illness and recovery and all these, I mean, it's like those are the three words that I drilled down on, but it's a whole constellation / galaxy worth of cross sections, that have to be illuminated. And you're, as I've told you before, one of the most passionate and eloquent voices on these specific topics that I've ever encountered. And you're just a crazy, amazing warrior in the world, and are so brave in your educating us and waking us up to just the daily ways in which we crush ourselves and our health. And
that's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, that is accurate. We are crushing ourselves collectively.
You confront the shit out, so like all bad language already. You confront the heck out of all of us, and I thank you for it. So for people who don't know, Kimberly Kaye is an amazing human. I don't know how she does all that she does. She is a journalist. She is a musician. She is the co-lead singer and writer for an amazing band called Loose Cattle. I guess I call you guys Americana, but somehow you think you're on the fringes of that. But that's fine. I'll give you that. We're all on.
We're with you. We're with you. Everybody's struggling with labels.
On the fringe, right? But in addition to that, Kimberly, through events in her own life, meaning, I'll just be straight about it, she found herself in a position where she had to save her own life. And on the other side of that, and Kimberly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, on the other side of that, she became a passionate advocate for health and a practitioner. So her specific titles are functional medicine health coach, which she can tell us about. More to the point, an additional certification in functional nutrition as a functional nutrition practitioner, and a patient advocate. These are certifications that she pursued to be a more, what's the word? Empowered.
Compelling was what I was trying to, when I was going through I'm no longer a patient.
Yeah.
Well, I am still a patient, but I'm not just a patient anymore place. I was like, well, how do I have information, and it is important information. It's information that would have been really useful for me when I was just a patient. How do I make anybody listen to a woman in America? I need letters after my name. So my goal was to become a more compelling advocate and practitioner. And so that's why I sought that stuff up. So that's what I try. I think that people respond to letters after names, even if they don't know what those letters mean. And unfortunately, even if those letters are total bullshit, there are plenty of people who are teaching about health or teaching about recovery who are wholly unqualified to do so, and have never made any effort to ethically engage in that conversation. But they got a lot of letters after their name, which means they have millions of followers on TikTok, and so they have a lot of influence. But that's a completely different video.
You've got the letters, you've got the ethics, you've got the compassion. You also have a podcast called Human Fuckery, but that's a whole nother ball of wax.
Yes, that's a very, very different show, different discussion. For the purposes of today, right. I am a health coach, practitioner, nutritionist, and patient advocate, who also has a atypical body and still has to live with some kind of complicated approaches to being a person in America in 2023 as a result of that.
Well, why don't you talk a little bit about your experience, your atypical body, and how you have learned to embody it?
Sure. So the short version is one, people will see me gesturing and also certainly at some point see the large head of a white beast that I cohabitate with. His name is Poet. He's a special needs dog, and he's not cooperative as far as Zooms go. So just be ready for that. The short version of my story is that I have a genetic disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Once upon a time, it was considered a rare disorder. We now know that it is not even close to rare, but because it primarily affects women, it tends to be dismissed and underdiagnosed and under-researched. And so it was perceived as rare because we didn't actually have proper clinical diagnostic criteria for it until 2017. I was born in 1983, so that was a very long time to wait for clinicians to start to have a way to diagnose people. And again, generally speaking, if people aren't aware, it takes between 10 and 17 years for gold standard in research to trickle down through medical systems and hierarchies. So we can have great research like, hey, we know this disease exists. We know this medical condition affects X amount of people, and we know the right way to handle these things is this list of things. But it can take almost 2 decades for that information to get from the researchers and the professionals who made that area of study through hospital administrators, into seminars, into medical school, and then into the general population. So even for people like me who are finally, we finally have a diagnostic criteria for what we have, it's going to be a very long time within my lifetime and your lifetime before some of this information even hits the average primary care physician that somebody gets when you're on Medicare or Medicaid, or even the average hospital. As of today, published this last week in People magazine, a woman aged 33 in New Zealand with my condition died of it because her practitioner decided that she had Munchausen syndrome, which is a mental condition where you attention seek by faking illness. And so she died of a diagnosable and manageable condition as a result of widespread belief that women in particular are faking severe illnesses or, hysterical or anxious or mentally ill rather than biologically challenged. And so that was something that I ran into as a patient as well. I had symptoms for a very long time, started in childhood, got worse with the hormone changes that come when you're in your childbearing years, then shifted again as I started to move closer to perimenopause. And again as a patient, I was told, you're hysterical, you're drug seeking, you're anxious, you're mentally ill. I was even given a bipolar disorder, which, heads up for the folks at home, if you do not have bipolar disorder and you put a person on meds for bipolar disorder, you can make them very, very sick, and not just mentally ill by playing with their brain chemistry, but a lot of psych drugs are extremely liver toxic. So you can give people long-lasting medical ramifications by not paying attention compassionately and ethically to people's clinical presentation, not believing them about their own body, and also denying them access to management tools, waiting until a patient is in crisis or has already surpassed crisis, like had their major cardiac event, had their major renal failure, had crossed over into some sort of really severe illness. Then all of a sudden, especially the American medical system's like, oh, well, you had your heart attack. Well, here's all of the things we do for your heart attack. Or they're like, oh, you're in renal failure. Here's your dialysis. Here's your nutritionist. Here's your access to this. Medicare, Medicaid will cover this. But what we really actually need and desire as patients and as a larger community of people who are all going to be patients at one point in their life or another, certainly near the end of their life, everybody tends to become a patient. So even if you're not a patient now, these conversations matter because everybody's going to be a patient eventually. But we generally find that until you are a critically ill patient near death, America at large is not super interested in helping people manage before they're a critically ill patient.
They're not equipped.
They're
You
not
want to talk a
equipped.
little bit about your crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. My crisis point that finally helped me get a diagnosis was I went into multiple organ failure. That is what it took for me personally to be believed as a patient. And so I was born with, but a person is born with a lot of things, genetic mutations, things in their genetic lineage. Your microbiome comes from your mom's breast milk and is passed down through multiple generations of biological heritage. So there's a lot of things that everybody's born with. I was born with a genetic disorder. Had I had a diagnosis, been believed and been managed, I probably never would have hit organ failure. But because I was mismanaged, misdiagnosed, and kind of dismissed, I was put on 22 medications, only 3 of which I should have ever taken, 20 of which are contraindicated in people who have my medical condition. Our livers don't process things the same way other people do. So I personally was 33 years old and in organ failure. And I was sitting in Louisiana where multiple doctors were going, something is very wrong here. I don't think that this is mental illness anymore, but I don't know what to do and we don't know how to fix it. So I personally was about 90 pounds. I couldn't eat solid food. I looked like a walking skeleton. And fortunately, my bandmate, Michael Cerveris, and a couple other friends and some very benevolent people in the Louisiana music scene said, well, this is fucked, and started a GoFundMe and raised an absolutely heroic amount of money to get me sent to Cleveland Clinic, where some very smart and gifted people, including psychologists from Mayo Clinic, immunologists from Cleveland Clinic, functional medicine practitioners from Cleveland Clinic, and immunologists in the immunology department, got together, finally looked at my case as a group. And the psychologist said, this person is not crazy. They also are not bipolar. They're having reasonable emotional responses to being told again and again, there's nothing wrong with you. You're totally fine. And there's nothing we can do for you. And the functional med team said, all of this blood work is not looking correct. And this is not what a healthy person looks like. And the immunologist said, well, it's not this, this, or this. So as a group, finally, we had a powwow and figured out there's something happening. And that was in 2017. And then the recovery process began, because that was just, oh, hey, now you have a diagnosis. But what do you do when you can't eat? You can't poop. Your liver isn't working properly. Your cardiovascular system severely challenged because you've had an unmanaged condition for 30 years. And also you are flat broke. At this point, every penny I had ever made, and I had been a full-time journalist in Manhattan, I had been a part-time musician getting paid on top of my journalist salary. I had health insurance. I was married at the time. I had a spouse who had been working. We put every penny into trying to make sure I didn't die. And we did make sure that I didn't die. Props to us. But now it's 2017 and we have a diagnosis and needed a nutritionist, needed a physical therapist, needed an occupational therapist, needed a mental health practitioner well-versed and experienced in medical trauma specifically, because complex PTSD, the things that happen to you into your life compounded for that C, plus then the things that are done to you within that life that are not your fault, stacked on top of each other, eventually will profoundly influence how people's nervous system and immune systems function. So it's not as simple as just, we put you on your medication, we give you your foods, we get you off these medical devices, we reteach your body how to work. You can't reteach a person's body how to work as it's wired to work if they have complex PTSD, or if they have PTSD that's being untreated because their immune system is dysregulated. Their ability to make certain chemicals that make their bodies work is impacted. Their inflammatory response is often hyperactive or completely suppressed to the point where they're getting every little infection, they don't sleep, they're reacting to foods that they're not actually allergic to. It's a nightmare. So, people who are good with computers or systems or work in HR tend to be really good at understanding this concept that if one thing within a system goes sideways, eventually all the other systems are out of whack until you have to kind of break apart the whole system and rebuild it. I think that as a community, we're maybe still trying to learn that like you can't just be like, oh,
we're more Band-Aid oriented.
I was just going to say, we like to be like, oh, we'll slap a Band-Aid on this and we'll put some duct tape on this and we'll medicate this and now you're good. And you're like, absolutely not. I'm really not great. So
like, I know in my experience, like I kept getting the medicines that were supposed to make me better and I kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And then for me, it was the depression that came from getting sicker and sicker and sicker in spite of everything that I was doing to not get sicker. You know, I found a place where I eventually gave up. Plus, you know, the stresses of older, you know, the stresses of taking care of an older parent and blah, 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 you know. And, you know, we're in opposite experiences in that I have a lot of diseases that people have known about for a long time. You know, they're like, oh yeah, you're a fat lady, you're gonna get this, this, and this. And you know, I held them off longer than they expected. They're like, why don't you have that yet? You know, but you know, but you got me, okay, you know.
Right.
But on that list of things they expected me to get, there's like heavily indicated for heart attack and stroke. And you already mentioned it. You know, I've been told that the only way I'm going to get the next level of care that I need is if I have my heart attack or my stroke. They're like, don't worry about it, it's coming. Don't worry, yeah, it's coming. Then we got
You're
you.
like, but what if we got out it, like, you know, if you see a very small fire at the base of somebody's home and there are children inside, as humans and as a community, we kind of agree that the right thing to do is not wait until the entire house is on fire to attempt to put it
wait
out.
for the gas can to explode. They're like waiting for, you know, it's like, ain't nobody getting out of that house if you, you know.
Correct. You're like, what if we just put this shit out while it was this big?
Right.
But there's not a lot of money in that. And also, I think that you've probably run into a lot of, there's a couple compounding factors that really play into your issues and the issues that a lot of people in the American South and a lot of women and a lot of people of color deal with. One, we still have medical books that say unhinged things like Black people have a higher pain tolerance than white people do, which has been debunked and was proven to be untrue by incontrovertible science decades ago, but somehow kicked around for so long.
They also let us sit with higher sodium, higher blah, blah, blah. You know, it's like, yeah, we're all in kidney failure. Yeah, we're all in dialysis. You go to any given dialysis clinic and look who's there, you know.
Yes.
And
it's madness.
And yeah, and as you say, like in you know, the the thing that I've spent the last decade working on primarily was CPTSD. And when I started you know, working my, you know, doing my trauma work, that wasn't even a word that people were really throwing around. And that was just 10 years ago, you know. But it was like, but I kept digging and digging and digging because you know, we do share the nerd factor. And and um and when I came across that diagnosis and that cluster of circumstances, it's like finally I got to raise my hand and say, oh, that's actually me. You know, when I got my PTSD diagnosis, I was like, what? I've never been to war, you know.
Never been to war, you know. It's so weirdly limited in our minds, and it's presented to us and then reinforced over and over again in movies, in songs, in TV, that it's like, well, if it's war, okay, buddy, you know, here you go to the VA hospital and we do this. But you do not have to go to war to be traumatized.
I think also, even though I had some very, very classic, like my ACEs score is an 8, you know, I'm not like, and even though I have some, you know, a very classic trauma history, because it started so early. My first sexual assault was when I was 3 years old, right? So I didn't remember a time when I wasn't carrying that. And I thought, well, it didn't kill me, so I must be okay.
Sure.
And
And
so,
that attaches to that resilience porn too, which is a really problematic
yes
thing that we're, like, it is incredible that we encourage people to cultivate resilience. Everybody needs to cultivate resilience in order to survive this life, regardless of where they are. But the sort of deifying and, like, again, the pornographic obsession with, like, well, look how resilient this person was, and if they could do this, you should do it too. And you're like, what if two things exist at the same time and are both true, which is that this person is very resilient and that is very impressive, and what they did was awesome, and also they never should have been fucking expected to do that to begin with, and it's not reasonable to use this person to bludgeon this person who is struggling with the same things that this person struggled with. It's
that's the classic cycle that's heavily imposed on Black women, right?
Yes.
Oh, she's so strong, she's so resilient, and it's like, and you're killing us slowly, like,
right.
And the truth is, like, for me personally, because from so many angles, I got the message that I was really garbage to be discarded. Like, I was just damaged goods, and that was just what it was. My only point of self-esteem was my resilience. My only point was that, like, I'm still here, come at me, And I'm so glad that I still have that. Because I think there is some part of that that is keeping me alive. Like that is like, like that's kind of where I dig in, where my warrior spirit lives. And at the same time, I have learned that the biological impact of living your life that way is real, baby.
It's really real. Yeah, everybody's a chemistry set. Everybody is a different kind of chemistry set with different levels of different hormones and different enzymes and different microbes and different pathogens. That's all very interesting. But man, if you throw trauma, ACEs, your adverse childhood experiences, for people who don't know that acronym, and then a lot of other nonsense like compounding trauma, poverty, lack of food deserts, lack of access to preventative care, lack of access to standard of care, just meaning, like, here's the baseline that the average person gets when they go to the doctor. And here are the hundreds of millions of people domestically and internationally, but we're talking about here, who don't have access to just the standard of care. Not even the good stuff. We're not talking about Mercedes-Benz health insurance, stem cells, and private chefs. We're just talking baseline. The way trauma plus lack of access to care plus not putting the fire out before it is consuming the entire home and everybody inside changes somebody's internal chemistry set so that they are working behind the 8 ball in ways that, I mean, you cannot. It's really hard to make people who haven't taken advanced biochem or just aren't interested in that kind of, that their brains don't sort information that way, understand how much, like, this isn't Hogwarts. You can't Harry Potter a wand and be like, well, because I said the magic words and I dropped the magic pill into this, now it's all fixed. It's like, that's not how biochem works. Like, this pill is amazing and it can do some incredible stuff. This medical treatment can be amazing for some people. But if this person's chemistry set is frozen or compromised in such a way because of trauma and what they're being forced to endure, even though they're compliant, which is a horrible word in medical care, but it's there, even if they're complying with doctor's orders, even if they're doing what they're supposed to, there are myriad medications and therapies that cannot work if a person's nervous system is frozen in trauma loops, or if their immune system and inflammatory systems are so impaired by trauma that they're no longer working the way the textbook says they're supposed to work. This medication was tested on normal people with average function, and it was designed to work that way. Traumatized people are not normal people with average function. They're people who are living in these fringe bubbles, and that has to matter.
And the thing is, to speak to that, so often folks with a trauma history are uninvited from participating in those studies to begin with. Yeah. So the baseline we're just never included in the baseline. And so, and I don't know about your experience, but it sounds like you can relate to this, that like, that if your body doesn't respond to the medication the way they expect it to, the way the baseline said so, it's somehow your fault. Like it's somehow,
Oh God,
yeah.
yes. And that as a practitioner and somebody who advocates for patients really gets under my skin, and is something that I push back against a lot, because we now know, and again, there are things that we didn't know before, and there's a certain amount of radical acceptance that we all have to deal with about, we don't know what we don't know until we know it, and that includes systems of knowledge. And so
Absolutely.
until quite recently, we were missing a large part of the equation. But 25% of the entire adult human population has a gene variant, which means that they will not absorb or metabolize more than 75% of the medications on the market today, the way the average patient will. And so if you're an outlier, a medical outlier, a person who doesn't respond to the medication the way you're supposed to, you're treated like, 1, you're a freak, 2, you didn't comply, 3, you did something wrong, 4, you're bad. But actually, medical outliers comprise a majority of people. It just depends on, are you talking about this medication? Are you talking about this age bracket? Are you talking about this racial or financial demographic?
Right.
Like within, so there's normal, the myth of normal. There is no normal, because as soon as you shift from, well, are we talking about patients from 18 to 26 or from 35 to 40s? Or from 60s to 8, like every time you shift your sample size, your normal shifts as well. And so the idea of they're being normal, and like that, well, okay, this is just how this works. Well, this just works how, within whom, under what circumstances, and in what areas. Because things like looking at the way we approach medicine in the American South, as opposed to how it's approached in areas that have more progressive approaches and less institutional racism, which is absolutely not to say that there isn't sexism, misogyny, bigotry, and racism institutionalized within all medicine in America. But we do see things happen in hospitals in the American South, even in 2023, that will make people clutch their pearls in other parts of the country, just being, and I'm talking about, when I say people clutch their pearls, I'm talking about medical professionals, people who are used to this system and its failures and are very well versed at it. But like the standard of care, when I got to Cleveland Clinic as a patient and said, here's the list of everything that's been done the last year in Louisiana, and here's the treatments I've been receiving, one of the specialists on my case literally went like this, covered her mouth, clutched her heart, and said, we haven't done this to women in 25 years at this hospital. This has been debunked. We know that this procedure causes pain, causes trauma, causes suffering, and doesn't cause, it doesn't do what it says it's going to do. The theory was in the she said they're practicing 1970s and 1980s medicine on you in 2020, or at the time 2017. And this is medical abuse. But here it was the standard of care. So I became aware, in the most uncomfortable way imaginable, that there are people alive practicing medicine at the same time who are literally living in different realities, where the doctor here was saying, this is the standard of care. And the doctor just 1,000 miles north was going, this hasn't been the standard of care since 1976. What is happening?
Here's where I think, I know that people, I was going to say in poverty, but really anyone in our system, middle class and below, we always feel choked, like there's never enough resources for us to really advocate for ourselves in the flow and the context of all of this. And but I think this is a point to make clear, like that, I really want people to learn to be encouraged to self-advocate. Like I know for me as a patient, just as a fat patient in any given doctor's office, literally until I got to the musician's clinic and had, Catherine, talk to me, like possibly every other doctor I met, would, attribute everything that was wrong with me to my weight, or they would ignore what I came in for, to
Right.
address my weight,
As
um,
if you weren't aware, like as if you
right.
live in
You
some
know,
sort of strange bubble where you have no connection with your body and had no idea.
and also, I mean, well, maybe they were right about that because for a long time I had no connection with my body, but that's another
That's
story.
fair.
Oh, dissociate.
Disassoci-
Oh, no.
Disassociation and delusion are not the same thing.
That's
They're
true. That's
similar outcomes sometimes, but not the same
Well,
thing.
and there was a time, and there are plenty of fat ladies out there who can relate to this, like who are just healthy as hell. They're healthy, they're strong, there's no problem. They're just fat ladies. And there was a time when I was one of them, I was doing pretty good.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of grotesque, to go into the office because like, you hurt your leg or something, and somebody suggests, "Oh, have you ever considered the stomach surgery?" As if that's like some, casual thing that, well, I was just thinking about that this morning over breakfast, like, you
Yes,
know,
as I sat with my bleeding ulcer or my broken leg, I thought to
right. I was
myself,
totally thinking about
bariatric
that. I'm
surgery
so
is
glad
the
you brought
solution for
it up,
this.
And um, but I think, until Liz started, my wife, who is white, and who's fit, she was very fit at the time. And when she started showing up to appointments with me, like she's like, she clutched her own pearls. And so it's like, so even when uh we're all in the same boat, we're still getting different care, you know
Yes, absolutely.
and so, like, I remember the first time I think it happened, I went to see a cardiologist because I'm diabetic, and diabetics ought to have a cardiologist. That was why I got sent to the cardiologist.
Right.
And this like football player looking guy, very handsome, very, debonair, comes in and he's like looking at all my blood work and charts and shit. And he's going, "Oh, yeah, the heart's fine. Why are you here?" I was like, "Well, because I'm a diabetic and I was told I needed a cardiologist. And so they made an appointment now." They're like, "Oh, well, your heart's fine, but I'm the one they're gonna call when you have a heart attack. So, in the meantime, here, try this beta blocker. Maybe it'll make you feel better." I was like, "I ain't come in here because I wasn't feeling good. I was trying to be preventive, and instead,
Sure.
it was come talk to me when your whole system falls apart, and and here's a beta blocker." And I was like, "Okay." So of course I tried the beta blocker because I'm a compliant, so and so. And of course it knocked me out. It put me to sleep. I was like, "Well, I got too much to do to take your beta blocker." But just the fact that even though even though I had heart health, it was still like the only thing he saw in me was a future patient. And
Right.
this is kind of what brings me to right now.
Mhm.
Like over the course of the last couple of years, like really the last 3 years, because the last couple of years I've been on the road, but I think I started really going downhill during COVID, not unlike a lot of people. Like my mother moved to Louisiana in the fall of 2019. And when she came, she was fully functional. She could go grocery shopping, and she,
Mhm.
just a cute little 4'9", Mighty Mouse, with a little bit of rheumatoid arthritis, but we were working on that. Um, and then, within a year of COVID, like she was unable to walk.
Mhm.
I used to force her to use a walker instead of a transport, when we would go to, doctor's appointments, because I'm like, "Mama, you gotta move."
Take
But
them steps,
well,
right?
and then her MGUS advanced into multiple myeloma, and so I stopped forcing her to walk. But now she's pretty much immobile. And
Mhm.
in the time that I was taking care of her, um, it became harder and harder for me to, handle my own regimen. And all of my diseases started advancing, you know.
Mhm.
And so when I went on the road, I knew I was sick, but I had waited my whole life to travel with my music. And here was my opportunity, and I wasn't gonna just, ignore it, because waiting for my body to, like, I'm like, my body, man, I don't know if we've ever been friends, like, for one reason or another. I was like, we're gonna do this thing. But that lifestyle, like, I think just the combination of the sedentary business of driving everywhere, and also the stress of, your 14-hour work days, and then also, the stress of the financial burden, like, everything just got out of whack.
Well,
So
and also reflect on the things that you said before you even mentioned going on the road, which is you were taking part in elder care, which we know is an antecedent for major health changes in the caretaker. Like this isn't woo woo, but we have really great data that people who are caretakers, whether it's for a special needs child or an elderly parent, their caretaking is a constant cortisol raiser, and that chronically elevated cortisol, the fear of your phone ringing with bad news, the constantly having to be in doctor's appointments, the having to advocate for people, these are compounding stresses, which have really deleterious effects on people's biochemistry. And then you compound with that, constantly exposed to viruses. I'm cut off from larger community that is actually good for my biochem, because this virus means that we're all behaving in this different way. So it's not just I'm on the road, I have pre-existing conditions, it's hard to be a musician. It's I'm
right,
caretaking for sick parents. I'm in the middle of a plague that has serious effects on everybody, including the pets. And then on top of that, you already had all of these things that you have been talking about, from the ACEs of your childhood all the way through the medical mismanagement as an adult. And so it's easy to start to look at things as, oh, well, it's, I was on tour, or it's my job, or it's this, but actually it's everything. Like
right.
Lauryn
And
Hill
I know
did
that.
us a service by saying everything is everything.
Right. But and even when, like, if I try to boil down the story, it's really just for other people to try to, like, grab onto something that they feel like they can understand. But
Sure.
my journey in working with my PTSD, like, I'm like, oh no, this is an entire constellation. This is a galaxy of convergence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and my medical care team is just waiting for me to stroke out or have a heart
Yes.
attack.
Yes.
And I can't I can't do what they're doing. But I don't have the skill set to save myself from a heart attack. You know what I mean? Like, if I have a heart attack, I can't fix that. Somebody's gonna have
Mm-hmm.
to cut me open, and I gotta da, 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 da. I can't fix that. The other thing is, there's nothing that my care team could do for me that could really help if I weren't in parallel doing the thing that I'm trying to do right now, which is rehab my
Mm-hmm.
body, right? Like,
Right.
I have to do I there's a whole realm of things that I need to do, and focus on and reorient myself to, basically retrain myself how to be,
Mm-hmm.
um in order to support anything that they would be able to do, on their end, you know?
Right. And
Um,
something I've found really frustrating, especially living in Louisiana and working with patients in Louisiana, and I work with patients all over the country, so I have an understanding that it can be different in other places, but it's also very similar in other places as well. But the problem with the way we've sort of set up and compartmentalized your healthcare team, this person, your cardiologist here, your nutrition person over here, your therapist over here, your renal person over here, and they're all over here and they all hyper focus. Nobody talks to each other.
right,
And as a result, they're giving you and other patients, myself included, instructions with a hyper focus, but without any real awareness of, so you can do all the exercises. You can go to therapy every week and tell the truth and listen and apply the lessons that you learn. You can do the breathing exercises. You can take the medication. But if nobody's looked at your gut and said, you know, does Lilli or this patient have the enzymes necessary to break down the food that they're eating, integrate the foods that they're eating in a complete way so that their cells actually get their B12, their B6, their B1, their selenium, their zinc, so there's the nutrition component of that, the biochem of that, but then there's also things like, so I work with a tremendous number of patients who are, you know, clinically overweight, and they're constantly berated that this is about your weight. You don't try hard enough. You must not be telling the truth. You're not compliant. You're not doing the things. You're obviously not following the diet. Well, one, not every diet is going to work for everybody. And so, you know, you need to follow this diet. Well, has anybody actually sat down and done any of the testing or conversing, the clinical conversing, spending 90 minutes with a person saying, talk to me about how you function from the minute you wake up. What's the first thing you put in your body? How do you feel after you eat? How do you feel after you have coffee? What do you do this? You can very easily put a person on a therapeutic diet, which is bad for them, because you're just going by weight and you're going by a textbook and you're not actually having a real conversation with a person about how
And
their
the
body
focus
works.
is only ever calories, you know.
Oh
So
my God, and it makes me crazy.
Exercise, but like, you know, right. So like,
And then
of
on top
course,
of
like
that,
everybody's gone through that cycle where they starved themselves and got bigger and they like, you know, everybody's tried it, you know. But you're right. It's like, you know, there's this specificity that our system is really not set up to support, like, you know, traditional medicine is not set up to support, which is why practitioners like you are so vital, because first of all, it's holistic. um you don't dismiss, you know, traditional, you know, Western medicine, but it's like you
no.
integrate it, you know, your focus
If
is to
you
integrate.
have sepsis or you get hit by a bus, I
Right.
cannot be more explicit. Please go
You're like, I
directly to the
can't give you a
hospital.
cracker or an enzyme.
There isn't an herb for this. No
Right.
crystal will fix this. You should not be trying to address this with a breathing exercise and a mantra chanted 108 times. Like, that's not the solution to this. But there are certain, you know, now it's been really interesting over the last couple of years as microbiome science improves. We're better able to advocate for patients now because it's finally starting to that, you know, 17-year delay in, you know, research matriculating into the larger system. But we finally have some doctors that understand, oh my God, if a person is overweight, I need to be looking in their gut to see if they're missing certain strains of bacteria, because there are diabetics right now who have elevated A1C as a result of missing a strain in their gut called Akkermansia. It was either killed by antibiotics, killed by chemotherapy, killed by stress, killed by drugs, or they never got it to begin with because their parents didn't have it for a variety of reasons. You're born without this for the rest of your life. Your body has a stronger insulin response or a blood glucose response than the average person. People who have a ton of Akkermansia naturally walk around more prone to inflammation, but they're also more prone to being skinny. I'm a person who, when their gut was tested, they found you have too much of this. Actually, we have to bring these levels down.
Can I have some of
Meanwhile,
you?
you can absolutely have some of mine. It's called a poop transplant. It is a real thing that exists, and it is tens of thousands of dollars, which is a
That'll be
continuing
another
issue.
GoFundMe,
It's a
right?
whole other GoFundMe. But yeah, there is a way that you could get
That's
more.
that's one of those interventions that I'm jealous of. I'm like, if I could just have a poop transplant, where would you?
Yeah. Yeah, and fun story for a different podcast. Literally, we did do a podcast about this. I did have to get a poop transplant because while I had plenty of this strain that helped keep me thin and helped make sure that certain things weren't an issue for me, I was missing other strains I very much needed to live and process my food and make neurotransmitters and regulate inflammation and control my immune system. So it really is very different for everybody. And as a result, systems that are designed to work with patients who are average are going to fail the majority of people. Our system is set up to fail the majority of all patients.
And also, you know, the microbiome data, that seems like it's been a relatively small subset of specialists who like learn about this stuff and are like, oh my gosh, this is running the whole show.
Yeah.
And all the other specialists are like, no, my thing is more important, you know, and it's like, but you know, the more, you know, I feel like, you know, the more I learn about it, the more I'm like, there's nothing to dispute. Like, this is the heart of so many, particularly American uh, epidemics. You know,
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
really, really amazing. And I'm waiting for that 17 years, but I'm like, yo, South Park already did an episode on it. Y'all need to catch up. You know, like,
You're not wrong. It is really sad to me how often South Park and certain cartoons get to things before the people with billions of dollars to actually do something do. But that's a whole different podcast. But the things that you're doing now are incredible. It's inspiring to watch somebody not wait until the entire house is on fire and go, well, okay, I'm going to do something about it. But unfortunately, you are punished financially. And anybody who decides that they're going to get out in front of the fire and put it out early, there's all, you're de-incentivized to do it because you have to take time off from work. You're then called lazy. People are still trained, even though we're finally having conversations about how the healthcare system fails folks, how trauma compounds and affects people, especially in marginalized communities, in unfair ways, how it changes. We're finally having conversations we need to, but there are still people who will look at a person taking time off to proactively do something about their health and say, that person's lazy. That person doesn't work hard enough. And you're like, which is it? Are they lazy because they got these conditions? Are they lazy because they didn't do the work? Are they lazy because they're not working and they are doing the work? You can't have it. We're so quick to judge people, and we're very, very quick to throw sick people or people who are struggling in the bin. And unfortunately, we are also very quick to throw people who have PTSD and CPSD in the dustbin, because speaking as somebody with a CPTSD diagnosis and all of the things that come along with that, when you are in the throes of acute PTSD or untreated CPTSD, you are very difficult to be around. And it's on the patient to become aware of what's happening to them and deal with it. But also, we're having all of these big kind of, seemingly provocative conversations about, okay, we got to be trauma informed and we got to make more space for people with trauma. And we got to be, better about being trauma informed. Also, that person really reacted in a way I didn't like one time and it made me uncomfortable. So fuck them. They're canceled now. And you're like, no, you can't know. Like,
right.
some
And
of
that's, you know, that's the whole, that's, you know, like, you know, that my slogan is practice radical decency. And like, and a lot of what drove that kind of drill down was recognizing, oh crap, we're all either personally traumatized or collectively traumatized. And like, we all need to turn down the knob on the reactionary stuff, because all that does is create more you know,
more trauma.
what's the word I'm thinking? Inflammation, right?
Yeah,
And
you're
inflammation,
right.
that's what's killing us. So, you know, it's like de-escalate, because, you
Right.
know, and learning that I had the ability to do that for myself um was incredible. But I
Mm-hmm.
also realized that if I was a person who, for as long as I could remember what my name was preparing to die by suicide, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I learned what the triggers were for ideation, how to be responsible with myself in the context of ideation. And I turned down the burner on that, so it's low enough that that it finally went out, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I learned that I, as you know, this limited biological psychological phenomenon could can completely change my reality psychologically. I thought, oh, that's an achievement. You know, I can do
Mm-hmm.
this. other people can do this. I can preach about it. I can sing about it. I can facilitate it by making beautiful melodies. I can, this is a thing, and I'm gonna preach it, from the hilltops that this is a thing. Um, and and even in all of that, I never thought that I would get to a place where I would be willing to apply the same principle to my body, because it was too terrifying, because
Sure.
there were pockets of trauma that were too triggering, that were going to put me, like, spiral me back into a CPTSD, kind of episode, and people be like, "Oh, get out of here, get out of here." And I realized that I had to be in a safe enough space to do the whole kit and caboodle, to deepen in the work of, healing my nervous system, to deepen in the work of healing my body, being in my body, working in my body, and working through, which is why, yoga is so valuable for people, for bodies that can do that, because you're strengthening your whole core, and also you're working the nervous system, like
Right.
and and trauma informed yoga is the whole thing, and I love that, and yet that's not really a possibility for my body. So
Sure.
it took me a while to both be willing, and a and a lot of labor, truth be told, to get to the place where I have the belief and the personal resources to address my body in the same way I've been working with my nervous system and with my mind. And there's a certain kind of toxic thread that would say, well, who does she think she is? You know, we can't all just pull out a life and yada, yada, yada. And but I'm like, y'all don't understand. I will pull out a life one way or another.
And also, uh, that's a thought terminating cliche. It's a byproduct of capitalism and colonialization and a lot of nonsense, because for a
Precisely.
very, very long time,
But
predating any of
but
our lives, but for a long time, pulling out of life was the way that the tribe would heal a sick person. They would go, you over there, go lay down. This person's going to take care of your kids. This person's going to clean up. This person's going to feed you. Go join the other sick people. We're going to take care of this for you.
but
So
in
it's
the
only very
capitalist
recently.
structure where we are programmed, and this is also informed by colonialism, of course. We're programmed to only be a function of our labor, and
Mhm.
the only labor that's valuable is the labor that that someone else is permitted to exploit. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
In that, like, even though this is labor, it's not labor designed for anyone else to exploit.
Mhm.
Honestly, I've even told my agent and my managers, like, if y'all want to make any money off of me, you gotta let me get well. Like,
Yeah.
you can exploit me later. I'm totally down for it. I was, like,
Well, I'm sure they understood that. So, or at least I hope they understood that.
we have to put it in
Uh,
terms that people can
yeah,
understand,
right, right. You
Oh,
can't use me for profit if I'm too unwell for you to use as a cash cow. Thank you so much.
and,
It's a shame
and
that you have to say that.
but if you think about our economic history, if we weren't able to serve an economic engine, then we were discarded, you know and that was
Sure.
just what it was. And they would build that into how they how they value their property. It's like, well, how many people are you doing? I mean, do you have? What labor are they doing? Okay, that should be about 7 years. They're gonna be dead in 7 years. Okay, then you're worth this much. It's like
Right.
that's our history.
Yes.
And so I do understand that me choosing not to wait for the heart attack or the stroke, and B, to be applying my labor towards something that's not, like, readily available for somebody else to exploit. I do understand that those things are counterintuitive. And also I want to live. So there's that.
I would really like you to live also. My guess would be is that you and I and Liz are not the only people who would like you to live. I hope that, people can see what you're doing, and watch it and, be inspired by it, or, have that moment of, oh, maybe I should think about taking a break, or perhaps I should look at people's breaks and have the same compassion and enthusiasm I feel for Lilli for them, even if I don't necessarily understand what they're doing or why. I think that we have done a very good job recently of letting people know trauma and healing are important, because if you ignore these things, people you love will die, and they will take the things that you love with them, whether it's the music or the clothes or the car, like whatever it is. If there is a person that you love and they make a thing that you love, once they're gone, that thing is gone with them. And I think COVID has helped a lot of people remember that when people leave for good, they take the things that they make and that you love that they make with them for good. But I also think that we are really struggling with looking at people who don't present as eloquently, as compassionately or creatively as you do. People are eager, fans of yours are eager to extend you some grace and compassion because of the work you do in the world. You say practice radical decency and they go, okay, I will. But then they see somebody who's lashing out or struggling or angry, or in that, angry, scary, frightening piece of their illness or their trauma awakening and treatment, and they have no space for it, and they go, that person needs to be canceled, that person is bad, they're irredeemable. And you're like, this is the most binary, unhealthy way of thinking about people that you possibly can. When you consistently give people who are struggling and in crisis things that they need to not be in crisis anymore, they tend to calm down and have something to be decent and grateful about. And if you're constantly withholding things, that basic needs from people, because they don't act right, it's just this cycle of crazy that you're like, I'm not quite sure how we haven't figured out that this won't work. If you take care of the least among us, there's fewer opportunities for people to spiral into violence and chaos and mental illness that is terrifying or destabilizing to you. When you keep saying, well, if you don't work for it, you can't have it.
Right.
How do you expect people to get better?
And that's why I think practice radical decency is a pretty conservative thing to say.
It really is.
Obviously it's radical because, it's radical when you do it when it's hard, when it's hardest.
Sure.
But like you said, you take care of the least of these and nobody's gonna come for your stuff, like.
Yeah. At the end of the day, the reason I moved into patient care after a very long period of just being like, I want to make things and I want to write about things and I want to tell stories, was because I experienced radical decency and radical care. It saved my life. It restructured my life. And as someone who hadn't previously experienced a lot of that because of the area I was from and the bubble I was in, I did not know how to be a member of a community in the way that I needed to be, because I had never been raised in that type of community. I came from a family of, my immediate family is really good people, but I came from a family that is very racist, that has a lot of weird puritanical, well, people only get sick because God's punishing them for doing X, Y, Z. And when you come from that, you don't know how to extend grace, because from day zero, no one was extending any grace to you. And so this radical decency and radical grace descended into my life. And it was like, oh, okay. It completely reoriented everything for me. And so that's how I really ended up in patient care and patient advocacy, because somebody finally did it for me. And it is worth mentioning that Black women in particular have been preaching this for fucking centuries, but very loudly, decades. Like, here's how you do it. Here's what community looks like. Here's what advocacy looks like. Here's what action versus talking about acting. Here's what action versus performance looks like. And we have not done a particularly great job as a collective at listening, which is why it's really important now to pass the mic and listen more, but also just learn as much as possible. Unfortunately, learning is really, really uncomfortable, and applying new lessons is even more uncomfortable. And you don't get the same dopamine hit off of doing something hard that you do doing something easy and stupid and emotionally reactive. So I think it's going to be a while before.
That's another reason why I think I'm upside down, because I only get hits. I only get that dopamine hit when it's hard. I'm like, yeah.
Well, that's your aces speaking. That's your aces speaking right there. It's true. There are people who have been biologically wired to have a very different chemical reaction, but that's okay. Part of practicing radical decency is extending grace to people who are biologically wired very differently.
And also trying to learn to turn that on myself, and
Sure.
rewire that, rewire some of that, because like we get ourselves into trouble, but
Yeah,
you're
we can
right. Like
be.
it's
Resilience
not
masturbation
sexy.
is a thing too. There's resilience porn where you watch people constantly lift up these abused and battered and traumatized people who are like, okay, I'm doing great. But then you have said in this conversation things that indicate that you're a person who does that to yourself. Well, I'm the strong person. Well, this is what I do. Well, this is how I am. We're not actually reduced to our accomplishments or our resilience or our ability to suffer. We're a lot of different things.
We're a lot of
That
different
includes you and
things.
me.
They're valid. I mean, and I think this kind of takes me where I hopefully wanted to end on, was just like what hope looks like in this realm. Like hope
Mm.
looks like new information trickling down, and hope looks like more and more people self-advocating. And I think that's happening since the pandemic in particular, because a lot, being forced to stop for a minute let a
Hmm.
lot of sanity catch up with some people. And I feel like the conversation has changed, quite a bit just in the last few years. And so, and I've already expressed what hope looks like, to me personally, and what hope looks like in my community, just like, like us lifting our gaze, and being
Hmm.
able to take care of ourselves and strengthen ourselves in self-advocacy, reaching out to practitioners like you. So what does hope look like to you?
Man, that's a thing that I struggle with, because when you're raised in a family system that has been tainted by that kind of, puritanical Protestant, hope is assigned to you by God only if you earn it. If you earn it, then you can have hope. And if you haven't earned it, it's like, I'm like, whoa. It's like, just, I'm officially middle aged now and just learning to engage in hope and play with it and have more of a relationship with it rather than waiting for it to
I
descend when
mean,
I'm
it's a
finally
pretty
good enough.
threatening word, right?
It is.
Yeah.
And hope is, I think a lot of us are trained. I hope I'm not speaking just for myself, but I do think that there are a lot of people who were told that hope is childish, hope is naivete, hope is danger. When you hope, you leave yourself open to being hurt.
Mm.
And so you go through a lot of your life expecting the worst, predicting the worst, and planning the worst because you're taught otherwise. You're being dumb, you're not being realistic enough, and you're leaving yourself open to being disappointed. So for me personally, a lot of what's resonated about your message of radical decency and lifting your gaze, the first time I heard you say lifting your gaze was like, oh, like it made me very emotional, because
Mm.
that was a foreign concept. Just the idea that you're allowed to take your eyes off the ground and look up sometimes was,
Mm.
just hearing that was a prat, like being like, okay, sometimes I need to take my eye off. Here are the 50 things that can go horribly wrong and the 50 horrible outcomes. And here's the one thing that I would love to see happen. And I am actually allowed to put energy into hoping that that happens and not self-abusing if it doesn't happen. If
Mhm.
it doesn't happen, not going, well, that's because you weren't good enough, or because you didn't try hard enough, or because, your God doesn't see you as worthy of that. But for me, hope is also curiosity. Like, learning so much about how my patients and the people that I'm advocating for now, how that limited worldview, that lowered gaze, and that fear of thinking about the great ways that things could turn out, or the help that I could receive, or the money that would, like when my GoFundMe was opened, the first thing I said was, this will never work. No one cares if I live or die. It was the first thing I said. And then I woke up 2 days later and there was $15,000 in the account. And that profoundly changes your worldview. But I had to go in and also do the work of being like, okay, there was a lot of privilege attached to that. I had some famous friends. I was recently married. I had pretty blonde hair and big blue eyes, and presented it in a way that made it easy for a certain type of person with money to project things that made them feel comfortable putting money into my account. So there, for me, hope is curiosity and breaking cycles of just looking down or submitting or radically accepting things that you radically should never accept, which is that, well, your life isn't worth this, or no one will ever help you, or you don't deserve help, or you haven't worked hard enough. But curiosity in general makes me hopeful when I see people say, well, what about that new research? Or, well, so what do you know about this? Or will you come talk about trauma? Or, hey, I read this thing about this probiotic and it sounds kind of crazy. Like just people being willing to get out of the rut of like, it only works one way. I take the medicine. If the medicine doesn't work, I can't get better. For me, hope is curiosity, and looking at people whose behaviors might trigger us or scare us or feel off or feel foreign and make us react, and sitting with that reaction, and instead of going, I hate that person, or they don't deserve help, or fuck that person, or just being like, well, why do they act the way they act? Why do they think that? What could have happened to them to God? Just that alone to me, I think is hope. But I'm still learning a lot about that myself. So if you could ask me again in another 40 years, I feel like I would have a much better answer. So we could
that
circle
was an
back.
amazing answer, and you'll have to ask me too. I know the first time my coach asked me what I wanted, I bawled for like 3 hours. I was like inconsolable. What do you mean? What do I want? Like I was so incensed. Like, and again, that was over a decade ago. And now I can say things like, I want a therapy pool, and not like, cry about it every time, like,
yes. Yeah. And the barest minimum that you should want and have earned and deserve in your life is a safe place to exercise your body in a way that isn't excruciating to you. So I am hopeful that you're going to get the things that you need. And I am asking myself to not despair, that small thing, a safe place to exercise that won't hurt you more. Like, that's the big dream. Like, I want all of the people in my life, independent of gender, sexuality, color, or tax bracket, to feel like they are allowed to ask for more and have more than the barest fucking minimum. That's where I'm at personally. I hope that other people are kind of hitting the same place, because I think that we would all be a lot better if we said, I'm not accepting the barest minimum anymore for my people and the people that in my community. Whether we know them or not, we need more than the barest minimum for people.
I'm still where you are on the first, when you first launched the GoFundMe, like, I'm still like, ugh, nobody cares. And people have been so caring. We're doing so well with getting, approaching the goal. But asking for more than the barest minimum is still a super threatening proposition for me,
Yeah. And GoFundMe guilt is real. Like, it is real. And the wild thing is that once you get over the GoFundMe guilt, is survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt is a part of the constellation of symptoms I'll have to deal with the rest of my life, because there were a lot of people I was in the hospital with or was in contact with who had my same condition, and because they were trans, or because they were even poorer than I was, or because they were Black, or especially the ones who are a combination of those three things, they didn't get the opportunities and they didn't get the help that I got, and they didn't live. And every day I have to sit with, well, why me, and why not them?
But I think that the work you do more than honors them. I mean, for me, my answer to the why me has been the people who come up to me after the show and tell me things like, oh my gosh, I had so much grief, such and such terrible thing happened to my daughter, or I just lost my mother, or all of this kind of stuff. And oh my God, that thing that you said about self-forgiveness, or those tears are for me the why me.
Sure.
Like if I survive, then I get to keep facilitating this kind of global tenderizing that needs to happen.
Love that phrase so much. Global tenderizing. And I want to tack onto that. It's momentum. Every time one of us survives, every time one of us is able to be there for the larger group or be of service to the larger group, there's forward momentum in general for other people who might feel stagnated or completely stuck. And so I'm trying to attach to that, and I'm pouring a lot of karmic and psychic energy into the slingshot effect of Lilli's stone being pulled back and fired out, because when your stone goes forward, it moves lots of other things forward, even if you're not necessarily paying attention and seeing it happen. So
I've said it more than once, but I'll say it again here for those who've gotten this far in the conversation. The tiny piece of training that made the difference for me this year, from going from a person who never thought I'd be able to adjust my body to being ready and willing and asking for help, was watching videos of Glenn David Andrews, call him the Treme Prince around here, trombonist, vocalist, huge, passionate, crazy heart, Glenn, who, as you said, is one of those people who, if he was struggling or acting out, people wanted to, be like, oh, I can't handle him or whatever. But his heart is so huge and so dynamic. And he's been on a healing journey for years. And he started doing yoga and posting videos every day of him doing transforming his body and his heart, and his hashtags are like, recovery is possible, and just
Yep.
First I was like, Glenn, it's not fair that you're doing this, Glenn. And I was like, oh, you're only jealous because you want it. Oh, well, how would you get it? Oh, this what you do. It's been I've been on a meditative journey with these videos, and that whole thing about it rippling out and you have no idea who you're impacting by making different choices for yourself. And it's just been so potent and powerful, to just kind of take that ride, and find myself here and being like, that's gonna be me in a year. That's oh Lord.
Yeah, we got emotional. This is the effect that, this is the Lilli Lewis experience, y'all. This is what she does. She makes people feel feelings. I thought I was just going to come on and talk about the microbiome. But
I am experienced.
I have had the experience, but man, this was when I was like, I'm just going to talk about Akkermansia. Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about probiotics. It's going to be fine. I'm not going to have to worry about feeling feelings. But healing, and advocating for people is an emotional thing, and it's moving, and it moves mountains. It's just sometimes they're not obvious. Sometimes they're internal mountains. Sometimes they're structural mountains or systemic mountains. But you're doing things to move your body, and the more you move your body, a body's in motion stays in motion. These basic rules of physics. So I'm cheering for you to keep moving your body in ways that are safe and comforting and healing to you, because I know that when you move, other people are going to move as well. And ultimately, I just want everybody to heal. I even want the people I don't fucking like to heal, because I would like them so much more if they would heal. If they would heal, they would be likable. So I might not join them in their pool because I don't like them, but I do hope that they heal. And I'm working for them to heal, because it's the only way this gets better for any of us.
Amen. Amen. Well, you done said a word there. I'm going to let it. Let everybody heal. We've said like that's all we got to say. Just heal.
There's a t-shirt in that somewhere. I'll try and work on a good hashtag for it. But yeah,
like you, but I still want you to heal.
I don't even like you, but I hope you heal. That's my new. That's the way I'm just kind of rolling these days.
Like your church.
Poet too. That's poet's in on it. So, well, thank you for chit-chatting with me. Thank you for letting me tell my story to a few more people, and thank you for letting all of us participate in helping move you forward in this, because it's really, really important that you keep doing this and reaching people, not just with your music and not just with the things that you make and people capitalize with, but just by being here and talking to people. I love you. Very much Team Lilli on this project.
Yay. Thank you so much, Kim. You you got me. I love you. Good luck in everything.
Thank you.
Glad to be in your tribe.
And I will see you for some concerts real soon.
Let's do it. We gonna sing some shit. All right, man. Take care.
I will, Bill. Mwah.
Uh-oh.